and welcome to this episode of BookSmarts, Authors on Show, a creation of Clarissa Burt, founder of In the Limelight Media. I'm your host, Cristina Francy, and today I'm so thrilled to be interviewing Cindy Watson, who is the founder of Women on Purpose and creator of the Art of Feminine Negotiation programs. Cindy, I'm so excited to have you on the show today and to dive into the topic. But before we get
thanks
into
for
it,
having me, Cristina. Looking forward to it.
yeah. So before we dive into the topic today, can the audience get to know you a little bit more and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, you bet. It's been quite an interesting journey. You know, I grew up in a low rental apartment in what was known as a tough neighborhood. I didn't know it at the time because it's just home, of course. So as often happens, I think from that background, I was pretty driven. So I went right from high school to university to law school. But I always, given my background, really wanted to fight for the underdog. So I practiced social justice law for a long time. And I love that. But I must say, I reached a point when I felt a little niggling dissatisfaction with where I was at. And as I started giving voice to that, I realized I wasn't alone. So many women, you know, we do what's expected of us in life, right? And certainly I was no exception. And as I started giving voice to it, one thing led to another. And I really recognized that so many women don't ask for what they want in life. We don't get what we want in life. We are judged, and women end up either shying away from negotiation or bringing what, like I was guilty of, that overcompensating energy. And I'm like, you know what? Something is wrong. These are all myths, because the most powerful negotiators are actually people who bring so-called feminine skills to the table. And that's when my epiphany happened. And I have been on a total mission and feel so passionately about sort of spreading that word to help women step into their power to leverage to get more of what they want out of life. So
yeah, it's almost like we get stuck in that old paradigm of thinking, and it's like carried through us, through our ancestors and things like that, and having to break that, because it's definitely not how it was when our ancestors were born. Because at that time, people, it was kind of like, be quiet, don't, ruffle any of the feathers, you don't have a voice. And then, like the feminist movement happened, we wanted to get out there, we wanted a voice, we wanted to have an opinion. And so things were changing. And sometimes, you're right, it's hard for us to ask for what we want, or even to ask for help with the children that we have, even to ask our husbands, because we sometimes feel like, oh, maybe, I feel bad, this is supposed to be my job, but it's okay to ask for help,
Yeah. And it's interesting you say about passing on from generation. I often joke that, well, it's not a joke. It's like we pass on this deep, deep conditioning about what it means to be a woman through the umbilical cord from generation to generation. And it's not that long ago. I mean, women didn't have the right to vote or hold property. And yet, interestingly, in terms of our human experience, we used to worship a goddess for a long time. And then all of a sudden the paradigm shift and went to a much more patriarchal system where we got conditioned to keep ourselves small and play nice and don't ruffle feathers.
Well, and we were like property. And so when you look at the English language, when the Mrs. and the Miss, so MRS, is like you're taken, MS is your, a woman who is single, and MISS is you're like a girl. So, we, even when they were creating the English language, it was almost sexist in a way, because Mr. is always a Mr., but we had all these different titles for ourselves. And so we kind of fell under a category. And, even with that, or like Mr. and Mistress, Mr. has like a positive connotation and Mistress is negative. So, even with like the language, it almost was suppressive to us in such way.
Yeah. So, and even Ms. is a new configuration. I mean, you're clearly younger than I am, but it used to be Miss or Mrs. and there was no in between. And then Ms. was even seen as sort of a liberation, but you're quite right. It's still, we're being categorized and judged differently than men.
Yeah. So it kind of holds on to us subconsciously. I feel like, in having our power to use our voice. And so, speaking about power and using our voice, what is the art of feminine negotiation and why is it actually important for us to have this negotiation skills?
Yeah. And it's funny because I really agonized over whether to use the word feminine, because I knew there would be pushback about it. And particularly as we're moving away from sort of gender attributions, which I think is a good thing. So I'm like, am I dating it by putting that? And then I thought, no, the problem is, for too long, as I say, women either shied away, or I know myself, like in my law practice, my clients called me the Barracuda, and they meant it as the highest compliment, right?
Yeah.
But there's a high cost that comes with that. So when I had my epiphany and started digging in, I recognized, for too long we've defined success based on a more masculine, dare I say, competitive model. And as a result of that, we define success that way. We define conflict based on those models. So both men and women, I think, saw their feminine as a liability. It's like, I'm not going to be, and I was guilty of that. That's why I brought that Barracuda to the table. I'm like, wow, I'm 20-something-year-old, fresh face, right out of law school. There's nothing but men in my hearing rooms. If I'm going to get taken seriously, I better get a little scrappier. So that was one of the reasons I chose with intention to use the word feminine, because my hope is let's stop seeing these so-called feminine traits as a liability and see them as our secret weapon. And it's not gender-based, because both men and women have masculine and feminine energy. We all do. But when we all start seeing the feminine as a liability, I believe it's one of the reasons the world has shifted so out of balance. So the idea of the art of feminine negotiation is, if you actually look at the key skills that make the most effective negotiators, comes down to 6 skills. And for your listeners out there, I created a mnemonic. It's called R-FIT, right? Just think you are fit to be a great negotiator. And it's assertiveness, which most people see as masculine, but I think that's because they confuse assertive with aggressive. But the other 5 traits, almost everybody who's polled would consider them feminine traits. So it's rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust. So AREFIT. And rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, trust. They're all traits that are considered soft skills or feminine skills.
That we're naturally better at than men, not that we're trying to break into the gender things, but empathy, leaning on your intuition, things like that. Like women are naturally like a little bit better at it. I think so. I think it's just because we're meant to be mothers, and we got to kind of go off our intuition, like with children, or, our surroundings to protect, the family, things like that. So I don't know.
And also, I think that's a great point, Christine. And I think because of the point you mentioned earlier, in some ways we had to develop those skills to survive. I mean, when you're as property, you really better have decent rapport building skills and bring that empathy to the table and be able to build trust quickly and be able to be flexible just to be able to get what you need in life, frankly. So definitely, I think women are more likely. And I want to, for your listeners, remind them, I think a lot of women go, oh, I'm not a good negotiator. But that's why I really expand. To me, all of life is a negotiation, and women negotiate in hundreds of ways every day, whether it's with your intimate partner, with your kids, with suppliers. And if you get more intentional about, hey, I negotiate all the time, I am the peacekeeper in the house, I actually bring these skills to the table, you're going to show up with more confidence, which will allow you to be more assertive, because assertiveness is just confidence. Confidence comes from knowledge, and knowledge comes from prep. So it's quite a secret weapon when you tap into that knowing.
Yeah, no, your mental game is so much stronger than people realize. And it's easier said than done to sometimes switch it, because like I said, we get stuck in our old thinking and programming from when we were a child and things like that. But if we just shift our mindset to think you know what, I am a badass biatch, and I can negotiate anything I want. I negotiated my husband to marry me, or whatever, not negotiate, but I got the ring or whatever, we are better than we give ourselves credit for. So, I mean, it's a good reminder that you can negotiate, and you are negotiating throughout your life, whether it's negotiating with your toddler to eat some broccoli, negotiating with the vendor, things like that. So,
and I love that you raise mindset, because I actually think, and one of the things I often say, your first and most important negotiation is negotiating with yourself, negotiating your mindset every day, all day. Negotiate who you want to show up as, how confident you're going to feel. All of that is an internal negotiation as well. So I love that you raised it.
Oh yeah, but that is a good point. You are literally negotiating with yourself all day, every day. So yes, you are a great negotiator. You're negotiating all the time. So what surprises people most when they actually use your system?
Well, I think most people come to me, whether women in my mastermind or even corporate people but when I go in to do corporate groups and speaking, they're bringing me in typically, or coming to me because they want the business, right? They want they come for the business to get those increased negotiation skills, to make more money, to get more recognition. But I think the thing that surprises them, Cristina, is the beautiful impact it has on their personal relationships. And they love that, and certainly they get loads of value from up-leveling their negotiation for business. But even in complicated relationships, like one of my mastermind clients was dealing, her mom was in a long-term care facility recently, and her sister suffered from bipolar disorder. And there was all of this interpersonal tension at a time that I was already draining. And, working with her, I was able to give her some simple models to be able to use to up-level how she negotiated both with her mom and her sister and the healthcare providers, and to be able to come to a peace around that in a very different way. So I think that's the biggest surprise. People come for the money and end up going away with improved relationships.
Yeah, no, it's because our personal relationships will like affect like our business and things like that. So I mean, I think it's a really great tool to, even like you mentioned, like negotiate with the people in your household and that you're dealing with, because
Absolutely.
everyone has, there's always like personality conflicts. And so just like kind of like understanding how to negotiate with the personality that you're dealing with can make wonders in communication, and, hopefully meeting in the middle or getting exactly what you want in such way. So what are the biggest mistakes people make when they are negotiating?
Well, I call it sort of the 7 deadly sins, right? And I'll just briefly talk about a few of them, but ego is probably one of the biggest, Cristina, right? I mean, we go through life, especially because we define success based on that more masculine model. Ego shows up, and we've been conditioned to buy into the myth that, the person who is the toughest is the one winning negotiation, the person who is talking the loudest and the longest. And the opposite is true. It is the furthest from the truth. So we kind of play bumper car egos in life, right? Always bumping our egos up against each other. And ego is actually the kiss of death in negotiation. So if you find that you're the one who's talking the most, or you're needing to please, which is another form of wanting to be liked, which is ego. Any of those signs that you're making the negotiation about you, it's like my viewpoint, I need to just hammer it home a little harder. I say stop, drop, and roll, and then come in from a place of curiosity, ask questions, and really try to understand what the other person wants. So ego, attachment, getting too attached to it. I have seen people walk away from amazing deals because they were too attached to what they thought was the deal they needed, or alternatively get too attached and keep negotiating long. And even in our relationships, how often have we stayed in relationships way longer than it makes sense because we get too attached to the deal? Reactivity is another one, showing up being too reactive as opposed to grounding yourself and deciding in advance how you want to show up. North America, we tend to jump straight to business. Take time, build rapport. Don't get right to the money, right?
Yeah.
And not listening. We are horrible at listening in North America.
I was just about to say, listening is like going to be the main thing. And that's what's hard, because everyone likes to hear themselves talk, or they're already thinking of the answer or what they want to say before the person's even finished, and I'm guilty of it too, and I'm an interviewer.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one would be integrity, right? Just don't ever compromise your integrity in a negotiation. And in both senses of the word, like the original Latin comes from being whole. And when we do things that are actually out of character for us, we're not being whole or in integrity with ourselves. So show up with integrity and be in integrity yourself when you negotiate.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really great. And, the thing that you said, the number one thing is the ego. And sometimes that is like the hardest thing to drop. What is like a suggestion that you can let someone or give advice on to help drop ego?
Yeah, I think one thing is preparing for the negotiations. And particularly when, in business, where I think it's both for on our personal and our professional. In our personal lives, as you and I were chatting about before, it's sometimes like the people closest to us, we're not intentional about those negotiations because we don't even think of them as negotiating. So we're much more likely to have ego show up in those personal relationships. So just getting intentional about, the next time you're going to have a difficult conversation with one of your kids or your intimate partner, sit down and go through sort of some simple steps that will allow you to stay grounded and decide, what do I really need out of this? How do I have to show up to be able to achieve that? And what can I do to find out more of what they really want, not what they're saying, because the stated needs is like an iceberg, right? It's like the Titanic ready to happen in so many relationships. What people state their needs is like that top maybe 20%, 80% are those unstated needs under the water. So when you find yourself showing up, making it about you, immediately just get curious. It's that simple. That would be my biggest tip for that. Just simply start asking questions. You seem a little upset by the position that I'm putting. Can you tell me a little about that? I'm interested. I'm curious. I'm fascinated to hear that. You don't have to agree, but people want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to walk away feeling that they matter. And the more you're able to do that, you're going to trigger reciprocity and actually get better outcomes for yourself too.
No, that's great advice for the ego-driven person. I love that. So now let's go talk about your book a little bit. What were, what discouraged you the most in wanting to write this book, and what prompted you to want to put this out there for us to read?
Yeah. Great. That's, I love that you ask about what discouraged me, because one of the things I found shocking, like once I had that epiphany that I realized, wow, I'm showing up as a barracuda and it's spilling over into all aspects of my life, right? It's affecting my professional relationships, my personal relationships, my sense of self. I started not liking who I was. You show up at a hotel, it's like they don't have your room, hide the children. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening to me? And one day I was having a conversation with one of my kids, my middle boy, and I thought we're just having a normal conversation. All of a sudden he's like, oh, for God's sake, Mom, does every discussion with you have to be an argument that you win? And I got to tell you, Cristina, like it sucked the life out of me. And I was like, wow, I need to make a shift here.
Yeah.
And I recognized that pattern. But the thing that discouraged me the most was as I started really digging in and researching about this sort of unconscious gender bias and the conditioning and the fears and the blocks that women suffer from that hold us back from stepping into this natural power we have. Some of the studies, even though I knew it, were shocking to me. Like, there's one study with young women who were writing their SAT exams, and they had half the control group check off the gender in advance of writing the test, and the other didn't have to. So, I mean, simply check off whether you're male or female. And they've done very over and over again, those young women who were asked to identify their gender actually performed more poorly. I mean, think about that for a moment. The unconscious gender biases run so deeply that we actually underperform when our femaleness is brought to our attention. So I think we need to stop pointing the finger and saying, oh, it's men just keeping women down, and really own and recognize that women have unconscious gender biases against other women as well, and even against ourselves. We perform differently. And studies like did a study where people would read a book and it's the same story, a rags to riches story, but in one version, the main character, the protagonist, is called Howard, and in the other, Heidi. So you've got a male or female. And again, in overwhelming numbers, when people were asked what they thought of the protagonist, both male and female participants didn't like Heidi, but they loved Howard based on the same story. So that for me was the most discouraging, is recognizing just how deeply seated, much more even than I had anticipated, this unconscious gender bias holds us back, even ourselves, and these are the other women. So I wanted to write a book that was going to help women recognize that a rising tide lifts all boats, overcome these fears, overcome these unconscious gender biases. And I'm super excited. I just got my physical copy finally. I've been waiting and waiting, and it just came in right in time for International Women's Day. So that was super exciting. But my hope is that this book will change the way people, and women in particular, look at negotiation, how to do it, how they ought to show up, how they can get better outcomes, and lean into their feminine, and not lean in like, Sheryl Sandberg, who, I love, she did great work, but we've been taught lean in, elbow your way into that table. And I'm like, No, actually, what if we leaned into those feminine strengths? Imagine what a better world it would be.
Exactly, exactly. So where can people get their hands on this book?
Well, the book is now out. Originally, the e-version just launched, but now you can get either an e-version or the physical book. It looks like this if you happen to be looking for it in a bookstore. So it's my sort of brand colors. But you can get it at Barnes and Noble for sure, anywhere in the U.S. I'm a big fan of supporting your local bookstores as well. If you've got an independent bookstore, check it out there. But as always, it's available on Amazon as well.
Oh, perfect. And then is there like a little extra something that someone gets when they purchase the book?
Yes, and definitely for your listeners. And frankly, even if they don't purchase the book, I'll share the secret link with your listeners here so that they can grab it. But if you go to artoffemininenegotiationbook.com, it's not even just a one sheet. I put together sort of a list of supplementary resources, right? So you can actually work through some of the concepts in the book as a workbook and challenge yourself. Like, what ways am I making myself small, keeping myself small, and going through some exercises to help empower you, about how to keep a brag list to give yourself more confidence. Some of the concepts and models in the book, there are little blurbs about them as well, and exercises. So great resource for somebody who wants to dip their toe in and maybe check out about how they can up level to negotiate a better life for themselves.
Well, Cindy, this was such a fruitful conversation. I'm so excited to have you on this episode of BookSmarts Authors on Show. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and don't be shy. All the links are down below. Grab this book if you want to touch up on your negotiation skills, to tap into your femininity, and, own the conversation. All right. Well, thank you so much, Cindy. And thank you everyone for listening. And I hope to see you all in the next one.